gentlemen, if I could ask you to find a seat, we'll get started. So for the past 3 conferences, we have set aside one of our plenary sessions dedicated to one of our outstanding alumna, Carolyn Dawn Wertham. The speaker for this session represents the high quality of leadership and scholarship in their field that Kerry Wertham role modeled for our Corps of Cadets. I would like to recognize first, before we get started, her father, Mr. Ed Wertham, who is here for this event. Please give him a round of applause. Kerry Wertham, class of 2012, had the ability to positively impact others in her life, which was unfortunately cut short by a fatal car accident in 2015. She was one of those leaders who continually stepped up her game to meet challenges and routinely set an example for her peers, whether it was competing in track and field, serving as a team captain, or as a VMI cadet officer, all the while earning academic honors. Following her graduation, Kerry dedicated the next 2 years of her life as a servant leader working for Midwives for Haiti. Her love for and service to the Haitian people led to the opening of the Kerry Wertham Birth Center in Calabester, Haiti, following her death. Her final months were spent preparing to enter the Marine Corps Officer Training Program. Now, this year's Carolyn Dawn Wertham Leadership Speaker is Professor Amy Chua, John M. Duff Jr. Professor of Law at Yale Law School. Amy graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where she was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. After practicing on Wall Street for a few years, she joined the Yale Law School faculty in 2001. Amy is a noted expert in the areas of foreign policy, globalization, and ethnic conflict. Professor Chua is the best-selling author of numerous books, including World on Fire, How Exporting Free Market Democracy Breeds Ethnic Hatred and Global Instability, which, by the way, was selected by both The Economist and the UK's Guardian as the best book of 2003. She authored Day of Empire, How Hyperpowers Rise to Global Dominance and Why They Fall. The Triple Package, How 3 Unlikely Traits Explain the Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America. Her 2011 memoir, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, was a runaway international bestseller and has been translated into 30 different languages. Her most recent book, though, is Political Tribes, Group Instinct, and the Fate of Nations, which is the basis for her remarks today. Professor Chua has lectured widely around the world, including at the World Bank, the CIA, the Aspen Ideas Festival, Brookings Institution, the World Knowledge Forum in Seoul, Korea, and the World Economics Forum in Davos. In 2011, Time magazine named her as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Atlantic Monthly named her as one of their brave thinkers, and she is one of Foreign Policy's global thinkers. She also received Yale Law School's Best Teaching Award, probably the most exciting award she's gotten. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a loud round of applause for Miss Amy Chua.
Thanks so much, Colonel Gray, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for coming this morning. It is such a pleasure and honor for me to be speaking to you all here in beautiful Virginia at this historic institution. On a more personal note, it's a special treat for me to be addressing so many promising young cadets and other members of the U.S. military, because the U.S. military has played such an important role in my own family. My parents, who are both 85 now and doing really well, were liberated by General Douglas MacArthur in 1945 in the Philippines. They were both children during the Second World War and suffered through 3 years of Japanese occupation, and they both still vividly remember chasing after U.S. Jeeps, cheering wildly, and making V for victory signs as U.S. troops threw out free cans of Spam. When I was little, we would just eat a lot of Spam because they had such good memories associated with that. Also, my eldest daughter did Army ROTC and is now a captain in the Army JAG Corps out at Joint Base Lewis McChord. So I am delighted to be here. It is also a tremendous privilege and deeply, deeply humbling to be speaking in honor of Carolyn Dawn Wertham, such an inspiring young woman who clearly brought so much vibrancy, dedication, generosity, and compassion to this world, and whose short life could not be a better inspiration for this, in my view, critically important conference on ethics, citizenship, and leadership, social responsibility and leadership. Finally, a special thanks to Colonel Gray and Lieutenant Colonel Kim Conley for inviting me and organizing everything so perfectly. So by now, we all know that America is in the grip of a vicious political tribalism. I thought that short film captured it perfectly. You flip from Fox News to MSNBC, and it's like you're hearing about two different countries. Partisanship has become toxic, and it's increasingly difficult for people on different sides of the political aisle to talk civilly about issues like race, gender, guns, climate change, and election outcomes. Even COVID has been completely politicized. For me to try to figure out whether a certain medication works, I have to flip back and forth between the cable news stations. For the first time in many generations, there is serious talk among serious people that maybe it's time for America to just split up into red America and blue America, which for me, the daughter of two immigrants who came to this country because they saw it as a beacon for the rest of the world, would be tragic. So what I would like to do for the next 40 minutes or so is first to try to explain why America is so bitterly divided today, to kind of understand the root causes of this polarization. And then to shift gears and talk about what future leaders of America, you all, can do going forward to try to overcome this intense and bitter tribalism. And I believe the answer lies in remembering what it is that makes America so special and exceptional as a nation, different from any other country in the world, and re-embracing the precious civic values enshrined in our founding document, the U.S. Constitution. And then I'll open things up for questions. I'm especially eager to hear from you all. So let me start by saying that human beings, like our fellow primates, are tribal animals. It's biological. We're just hardwired that way. We need to belong to groups. And once we connect with a group, we tend to want to cling to it and defend it and see our group as better in every way. In a fascinating recent study, children between the ages of 4 and 8 were randomly assigned to either the red group or the blue group and asked to put on a t-shirt of a corresponding color, red or blue. These young kids, again, just between 4 and 8 years old, were then shown computer-edited images of a whole bunch of other kids, half of whom were wearing red t-shirts, The other half were wearing blue t-shirts. The children's subjects were then asked for their reactions to these kids in the computer. The results were stunning. Even though these children knew absolutely nothing about the children in the computer images, the subjects consistently reported that they liked the children wearing their color better, wanted to allocate more resources to them, and most disturbingly, displayed strong unconscious bias. When told stories about these kids, these subjects exhibited systematic memory distortion, tending to remember all the positive things about the kids wearing their color and all the negative things about kids on the other side. And these are just 4 to 8-year-olds. So humans aren't just a little tribal, we're very tribal. Once we belong to a group, our identities become oddly bound up with it. The effect is almost like a drug. We will seek to benefit our group mates even when we personally gain nothing. We will take pleasure when out-group members fail or suffer a misfortune. Neurological studies actually show that the pleasure parts of our brain light up when we stick it to the other side. We will sacrifice and even kill and die for our groups. Now, tribalism is not necessarily a bad thing. Sports is a great example. Incredibly fun. Nothing could be more tribal. I know that VMI just had a smashing and unexpected win yesterday. So we all know how that feels. Family can be very tribal. I will be the first person to tell you that I am a very tribal person. The problem is when tribalism takes over a political system. That's when things get dangerous. Because that's when you start seeing everything through your group's lens. And facts and arguments and policies don't matter. You just stick to your tribe no matter what, and you try to take down the other side. That's what we're seeing in America today. That's why we can't get anything done. We can't even talk to each other. We are at the point where many Americans see people who voted for the other side not just as people that they deeply disagree with, but as immoral, evil, and un-American, which is a really dangerous state of affairs. If you feel that way about half the country, that's a recipe for civil war. At the same time, we're seeing a fracturing and splintering within groups, within the left, within the right, with ever-dividing groups pitting themselves against each other. So why? Why is this happening now? What makes this moment in history different? I want to highlight 3 facts. First is the massive demographic transformation that this country is undergoing. For 200 years, America was dominated economically, politically, and culturally by a white majority. Now, when one group is so overwhelmingly dominant, it can oppress and persecute with impunity. It can do terrible things, silence others, slavery, but it can also afford to be more generous, to be more inclusive, like the WASP elites of the 1960s who voluntarily opened up the country's universities to more Jews, blacks, and other minorities, in part because it just seemed like the right thing to do. Today, it's completely different. Today, for the first time in US history, whites are on the verge of losing their majority status at the national level. The predictions vary. The Pew Foundation says it will happen around 2044. The US Census says no, maybe around 2050. There are different views about exactly what that will look like. But already a number of states and cities are now majority minority. Why is this important? This is important because the result is that in America today, every group feels threatened. It used to be just the minorities. Today, it's not just minorities who feel threatened, whites feel threatened. Over half of white Americans feel that they are subject to more discrimination than minorities. And this is not just a Republican thing. According to a recent study, because of affirmative action, diversity policies, about 30% of Democrats believe that there is some or a lot of anti-white discrimination. Today, it's not just religious minorities like Jews and Muslims who feel threatened. Christians feel threatened. You hear language all the time about war on Christmas, war on the Bible. When Donald Trump became president, many women felt threatened. With the Me Too movement, men feel threatened. Straights and gays, Latinos and Asians, every group in America today feels threatened. And when groups feel threatened, that's when they retreat into tribalism. That's when they close ranks, become more insular and defensive, more us versus them. That's why we are now seeing explicit identity politics on both sides of the political spectrum in the way that we haven't for many, many generations, possibly ever in this country. So on the right, we now see openly, proudly xenophobic white nationalist movements kind of brazenly holding conferences in DC and being covered by the mainstream media. Something like this would have been shocking just 5 years ago. A common theme is that the white race is in danger of extinction, about to be drowned by a rising tide of non-white people who are demonized as criminals or spies or people who just take away jobs from real Americans. On the left, it's just as bad. Today, there are openly anti-white movements. There are a growing number of best-selling books and training programs in which whites are demonized and asked to feel guilty and bad about themselves simply for being white. The result of all this is just more and more resentment and distrust all around. I see this so dramatically on the university campus where I teach, an extremely liberal campus. Compared to just 5 years ago, there is so much more self-segregation where people of different races, ethnicities, religions all congregate only amongst themselves. For 25 years, it used to be my favorite thing to see my conservative students and my liberal students become friends, best friends. They would argue passionately and then go out for a beer. That is just not possible, at least where I teach anymore. There's this new policing of boundaries that I find so destructive. Now it's like if you even talk to the other side, then you're not part of our team. You're not really a member of our tribe. So that is the first factor that is leading to so much tribalism and toxicity in our world today. Because of the massive demographic changes we've been experiencing, no group in America today feels comfortably dominant. Every group, whites, blacks, Muslims, Christians, they all feel attacked, persecuted, and pitted against other groups for jobs, spoils, university spots, and the right to define the nation's identity. A second factor fueling political tribalism is something that was alluded to in the film this morning, and that is social media. It used to be in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, that everyone listened to the same 3 major news stations. Now, to be sure, the news was dominated by a very narrow certain perspective. When I was little, all 3 major news anchors were white males, and white males pretty much ran everything. So it was by no means perfect, and there have been a lot of positive improvements. But I'll say this, at least the goal of the news was to be as objective and measured as possible, and everyone heard the same facts. Now, Republicans and Democrats have always disagreed, often bitterly. But in the past, they talk to each other, argue with each other, and often marry each other. For most of our history, Democrats and Republicans freely intermarried. You'd always see these mixed families. By contrast, today, we, first of all, pretty much get our news only from people that we already agree with. If you're conservative, you watch Fox or Newsmax. And if you're liberal, you watch CNN or MSNBC. And the anchors, whether Hannity or Rachel Maddow, they don't even pretend to be objective. Just the opposite. To get their ratings up, their incentive is to get people riled up and mad. Even more so with social media. The more biting and vicious you are on Twitter, the more likes and retweets you like. Doesn't matter if what you're tweeting is true or not. You tweet something kind and unifying and moderate, nobody pays any attention. So as many have noted, social media is basically an outrage machine, which creates echo chambers and just pushes both sides farther and farther apart. A third factor, finally, we are seeing the rise of a new kind, or at least newly intense kind of divide in America. Today, there is tremendous mutual disdain and hostility between America's so-called coastal elites on one hand and Southern or heartland or working class Americas on the other. Coastal elites, I'm surrounded by them, view and are extremely arrogant about how they talk, view Trump supporters as racist bigots, while on the other side, many middle Americans view coastal elites as arrogant globalists who hate America and want to destroy its economy and freedoms. Each side sees the other as evil and un-American, not even worth talking to. So we are living in a difficult moment, and frankly, a dangerous one. We really shouldn't sugarcoat it. At a time when China is very powerful and unified, they're able to be unified because it's an authoritarian, ethnically homogeneous nation. At a time that China's unified and extending its influence around the world, we in America are deeply divided along class, racial, and political lines, constantly ripping into each other. So, what do we do about this? What is the way forward? I am always and always have been an optimist. So here is the good news. Perhaps the way forward is not so intractable. Maybe things aren't so bleak. Maybe the answer is right in front of us. So I give a lot of talks around the country. I've been doing it nonstop since Political Tribes came out. And I'm almost always asked, is there another country, Professor Chua, out there that could serve as a model for the United States that we could follow so that we can learn better how to overcome our bitter divisions? And they're always thinking of Canada when they say that. And I always respond, absolutely not. America is the best model. We have so much better structure. We have so many inherent advantages because of our history. As cliche as it might sound, America actually is exceptional. This is because we have an ethnically and religiously neutral national identity. Under the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was passed after the Civil War, if you are born in this country on American soil, you are an American citizen, no matter your race, creed, or background. It doesn't matter whether your parents are from Mexico, Somalia, or Iowa, or whether you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. Our national identity is not rooted in blood, but rather in the principles of the U.S. Constitution. And where I teach now, I just see students trashing the Constitution, trashing the Founding Fathers. Worst thing, it is so important to remind ourselves how exceptional our founding document is. This makes us different from almost every other country of the world, including the countries of Western Europe, which seem a lot like us. But they all started off, and in many ways still are, ethnic nations. Not us, because our national identity is rooted in ethnically and neutral religious principles. We have an advantage over all other countries struggling to deal with an increasingly diverse citizenry. Trust me, European nations, they're all struggling with political tribalism too. But we are actually better equipped to unite a deeply divided, increasingly diverse citizenry. Specifically, because of our Constitution, alone among the major powers, America is what I call a supergroup. I don't mean a superpower. I mean a supergroup. And let me explain. Really easy to get. To be a supergroup, you need to satisfy two simple conditions. First, you must have a very strong, overarching national identity, capable of inspiring loyalty and patriotism. So America, a really strong national identity. But to be a supergroup, you have to satisfy a second condition. And that is that at the same time, individual, smaller subgroup identities, ethnic, religious, racial, cultural, those smaller individual subgroup identities must be allowed to flourish. And at our best, America is that rare country where that's true. At our best, America is a country where you can be Irish American, Japanese American, Syrian American, Cuban American, and intensely patriotic at the same time. Again, we complain so much, it feels so miserable right now, we forget how rare this is. It is really hard to satisfy both requirements. So if you think of countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, why did those countries just fall apart so quickly? Because they failed to satisfy the first condition. They're post-colonial nations without a really strong, overarching national identity capable of holding those countries together. But if you think about it, it's not just developing countries. Almost no other country in the world is a supergroup. Take China. China is a really powerful country, but it is not a supergroup. Why? Because China satisfies the first condition. It's got a really strong, overarching national identity rooted in ethnic Han Chinese. But it doesn't satisfy the second condition. Just read the news. If you're Tibetan or Uyghurs or Muslim, your identities are not allowed to flourish. People of different religions are not allowed to flourish. Same, by the way, with France. And France is a Western democracy that's a lot like ours. But France is also not a supergroup for the same reason as China. I don't know if you all know this. I mean, France has a very strong collective identity. The French identity is very strong. But ethnic and religious minorities in France must thoroughly assimilate. You can't wear symbols of religion. It's a completely different policy called laïcité. And they had a headscarf ban that some years ago that created a lot of controversy, a burkini ban. As former President Nicolas Sarkozy put it, if you want to become French, you must speak French, you must live like the French. And many believe that such attempts at forced assimilation have backfired with France's Muslims, contributing to social unrest and radicalization. By contrast, the United States is different. Through a long, painful historical struggle, which included a civil war, the passage of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees birthright citizenship, and a civil rights revolution, America has come closer than any other major power to being a supergroup. A country where subgroup identities are permitted to thrive, even as individuals are bound together by a strong, overarching collective identity. This is what has allowed us to be more effective than any other country in the world in integrating an extremely diverse population. We often forget this, but America's population was unusually diverse even from the very beginning. Colonial America was a multi-ethnic, polyglot mix of English, Dutch, Scots, Irish, French, Swedes, Germans, Greeks, and others of all different religions. The U.S. Constitution, within a few generations, managed to overcome all these internal divisions, uniting all these groups under a banner of ideas so that they all eventually came to see themselves as proud Americans. Now, back to today. Today, America's status as a supergroup is under tremendous strain. To repeat, we are at a perilous moment because of the three factors I mentioned: this massive demographic transformation, social media, and this growing divide between coastal elites and the rest of the country. But this historical status as a supergroup also holds the key to rebuilding our fractured republic. Recognizing what has made America special helps us see where we've gone wrong and provides critical insights to moving forward. So let me now offer a couple of suggestions for how future leaders of America, like you all, can help us get back on track and start trying to reunify the country, or at least moving us in the right direction. First, we need to promote and experiment with concrete initiatives designed to make Americans see each other as fellow Americans. Initiatives like this conference, which is why I'm so delighted to be participating in this. This is exactly the kind of thing that America leads, and I really commend Colonel Gray and everybody else involved. I'm also so excited that you're going to be hearing John Wood Jr. of Braver Angels. That, too, is an organization explicitly committed to bridging chasms, helping Americans see each other as fellow Americans. I've also written about a sort of national service program for not you all, because you guys are at an institution like this, but I've thought about for high school students. Right now in kind of coastal elite areas like New York City, a lot of kids take a gap year after high school. They go to Amsterdam or Guatemala, but they often stay in their same liberal bubble, and they go over there, they still hang out with their friends. What if we had some sort of program, I don't know if it's mandatory or voluntary, where kids right after high school from urban areas, New York City, Los Angeles, would go to another part of America, Appalachia, some Ohio, and work side by side with other young Americans, not teaching them and kind of talking down to them, but working side by side, getting to know each other on a common project. So that is the first kind of thing, concrete initiatives like this one. Second, and kind of more broadly, I think we all need to be much more protective of America's special national identity. This is a lesson that both the right and the left need to take to heart in different ways. It is extremely important to expose the grotesque injustices of America's past and present. I've talked about how America is exceptional in a positive way because of our unique Constitution, which from the beginning allowed us to unite as American people of all different ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds. But the truth is that America has also always been exceptional in a negative way. We have been exceptionally racist. As an empirical matter, alone among modern Western democracies, America had extensive race slavery inside its borders, which it did not abolish until 1865, nearly a century after the British abolished slavery in its colonies. We then replaced bondage with a legalized system of separate but equal, which was not equal at all, and which effectively implemented apartheid in many parts of the country. Even today, the after effects of slavery still haunt America in the form of systemic inequality and injustice. And we just need to admit this. No country can be great if it can't be honest. America, in particular, with its resounding constitutional principles, needs to be held to its own standards or fall under the weight of hypocrisy. But on the other side, progressives need to be aware of the danger in taking things too far. Their scorched earth approach to America its history, and its ideals. It is so common up on the East Coast, where I teach, to hear students only talking about America as a land of oppression, America as a nation founded on genocide. Many prominent prize-winning writers on the left routinely depict America as structurally committed to white supremacy. Now, as I always tell my students, there is a huge world of difference between saying that America has repeatedly and shamefully failed to live up to its own ideals, and we must all work harder to do better. There's a huge difference between saying that and saying that the principles in our Constitution supposedly uniting us are just lies and smokescreens to disguise oppression. Because if America really is nothing more than a land of oppression, founded on nothing more than genocide and white supremacy, it's hard to see why America is worth fighting for. It is true, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were slave owners, but they were also political visionaries who helped give birth to what became the most inclusive form of governance in world history, and we need to be proud of that. There is a similar danger, however, swinging back from the far right. America cannot remain a supergroup if we start wanting to define our national identity, for example, through our immigration policy, in terms of whiteness, or Anglo-Protestant culture, or Christianity, or any other term that is not inclusive of all colors and creeds. That would actually be a move in the direction of ethno-nationalism, more like the countries of China and Germany, away from what makes us special as a nation whose identity is rooted in principle, an idea, not blood. And this is a real danger. According to a recent survey, 30% of Trump voters think European ancestry is important to being American. 63% of Trump supporters said the same thing of being Christian. This trend runs counter to the Constitution's foundational ideal. An America where citizens are citizens regardless of race or religion. An America whose national identity belongs to no one tribe. Trying to define America as a white nation or as an Anglo-Protestant nation also directly threatens America's status as a supergroup. How are we going to have that strong collective national identity? Championing a national identity that by its very nature alienates half the country is not the way to unify the country. More profoundly, conservatives need to remember that in a country like America, patriotism is more than just standing proudly for the anthem or waving a flag. The kind of overarching national identity that a supergroup requires, capable of binding together Americans of all backgrounds, cannot exist unless everyone in the society has reason to love the country. If millions, because of the way they live their daily lives, believe that the system is rigged against people of their skin color or religion, or that they are as likely to end up dead or in prison as to get a decent paying job, they can't possibly be expected to buy into the idea of America as a great moral nation. At bottom, the threats posed by the left and the right are two sides of the same coin. The left increasingly believes that America's dream and promise were always a lie. The right increasingly insists that they've already been achieved, that nothing more needs to be done. Both views are wrong and miss a deeper truth, which is, as Colonel Gray mentioned, that America is an aspirational nation. Our ideals have always far exceeded reality. The American dream is a promise of freedom and hope, but it is also a call on all of us to make true the myths we will tell ourselves about what America has always been. The poet Langston Hughes captured this powerfully in his 1935 poem, which is called Let America Be America Again. And this is how I'd like to end. So it's a really interesting poem, and there are two voices that are speaking back and forth. The first is a really hopeful voice, and it says, let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love. But then a second voice answers, it never was America to me. Then the first voice replies, say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And then the second voice answers, I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the black man bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. But far from conceding and concluding with defeat, Langston Hughes offers a prayer and an affirmation. This is how he ends. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience, and I really look forward to taking your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Chua will take some questions. What I'd like you to do, if you have a question, please go out to the aisle and come up to the microphone, and she'll recognize you, and we'll go back and forth in the time allotted. So please, let's get some questions up here. State your name and where you're from when you address.
Good morning, ma'am. Hello, I'm Cadet Ellis Lee. I'm from Florida, and my question is in this time of strife, like we see in New York, the city, they took down a statue of Thomas Jefferson. So when you're in confronted with those situations of divisiveness, where they say, I want to take down Thomas Jefferson, and you say, I don't want to do that, how do you reconcile these fundamental disagreements?
Yeah, this is, one of the hardest issues I think our country is facing right now, and it's really intense at Yale Law School, where they're renaming buildings and taking down statues. My own view, it's just a personal view, is, some cases may be easy if there's kind of a relatively new statue that was put there clearly for the point of some terrible invidious motive, like intimidating people or something like that. But otherwise, again, this is just me not speaking as an expert, but my own view is I kind of think that we should respect our historical monuments and maybe add to them, and maybe say, look, this happened, there was a lot of terrible stuff, but we have to remember it, and honorable people fought for it. Individuals who, were doing the right thing, and brave people. But then put, other statues, maybe plaques, history, like we need to learn. So that's just kind of my own personal view, that I worry about, too kind of spontaneous. If you look at, we were just talking last night with Colonel at dinner, if you look at countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, one side comes in, they burn down these things that have been, monuments that have been around for thousands of years, and it's a tragedy. So I think with dialogue and kind of thoughtfulness is the best way to approach these questions, but really tricky question.
Thank you.
Is there one? Oh,
you were
okay,
first.
yes. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
It's a little tall. Professor Chua, thank you so much for being here. My name's Irene Thornton. I'm from Christopher Newport University. So my question for you is, in this world of tribalism here in the US, how do we combat these ideas of heightened political partisanship versus a stronger commitment to morals and values, which inherently then guide our policy ideas?
You know, this is going to sound like I planned it, but I really think the answer is leadership. So I'm very proud at Yale Law School, which is a mess. I got to tell you, it's a mess. No one can talk to anybody. For the first time, students say, I have these views, but I'm afraid of saying them. I don't want to be canceled. I am very proud that, so I have very, my class is kind of well known for being really almost the only genuinely diverse class or classes at Yale Law School. And by genuinely diverse, I mean politically too. I have a lot of conservatives in my class, but I also have tons of progressive, lots of minorities, lots of immigrants' kids. And I put a big banner on my syllabus, and my colleagues are like, oh my gosh, you're gonna get canceled. I was like, do not take this class, unless you are ready to do this. If you're very oversensitive, don't take this class. This class is going to be dedicated to fostering lively debate among people of different backgrounds. And if you hear something that offends you, you can't just immediately assume it's racist. You can't walk out. We need to talk this through. And many colleagues of mine says, oh, you're going to get 6 people. 150 people signed up. Longest wait list. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not easy. We have really tense moments in my class in a way that we used to not have. But it's been going well, So I believe that there is a silent majority, that there are these very loud voices that get a lot of traction, that you hear about, and for some reason, everybody follows. But I actually think that a majority of Americans are generous and exhausted from all of this. So to answer your question, I think conferences like this, where you're going with good faith in to really try to understand the other side. And it's hard. Sometimes you're angry. You don't want to understand the other side. I know exactly how that feels. But I think through leadership and a sense that if you look globally, it's a really perilous moment. I think we're going to get there. I am an optimist.
Thank you.
Thank you for your speech and for your writing. And I had a question based on a conversation I had yesterday over lunch. I ended up having lunch with 2 legal professors, so it's really pointed towards that and maybe a personal question afterwards. But we got in a deep discussion about, one of the professors was reading a book on the Frankfurt School and so forth, and I want to get your thoughts on where you feel the responsibility for some of this division lays with some of the ideas of postmodernism and the Frankfurt School, which seem to embrace narratives versus truth, and a lot of that does seem to be coming from the legal community. And the personal question that at the end is, how was your experience? I think the backlash on the Tiger Mom stuff, and how's that influenced your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I always just wanted to be a mild-mannered person and liked by people, and I just repeatedly find myself in the middle of these firestorms. So I don't know what it says about me, but I think that, first of all, it goes back to the previous question. I think a lot of this dissension and division is coming from liberal college campuses. I do think that. And I think that I'm all in favor of as many ideas as possible. So I would not be in favor of not letting people study the Frankfurt School or communism or whatever, But I think the idea is that, all views should be there, and then people should be allowed to disagree without getting canceled, or they should be allowed to push back, not hostilely, but without immediately being labeled, oh, then you must be a misogynist or a racist or whatever. And that's what I'm seeing. Like, I'm okay with all these different ideas. Postmodernism, it's not for me, but it's pretty interesting, and it's got a history. In my class, I teach contracts, which may sound boring, but I do something fun. I think that's why the wait lists are so long. I assign, in addition to teaching people real contracts, the law, I assign different schools of philosophy for how you can understand when it's okay to breach a contract or what should happen. One is a very conservative kind of libertarian school, like if you promise, and that's it, The other is kind of a law and economics school that's often viewed as conservative, but it's more about what kind of rules should we have in contracts law to make society behave better, to maximize welfare. And then I also assign works from the critical schools, right? Critical legal studies. What you guys hear now about critical race theory is unrecognizable. The thing that I hear on TV, that's like, to me, like a crazy caricature. And nobody has to agree with any one school, but what I like to assign the best of each school. And I assigned a piece that, by a scholar named Patricia Williams. And I didn't tell people that it was critical race theory. And all my conservative students said, oh, I really like this piece. Because if you don't have a label on it and you just address it on its merit, there is a lot more common ground than you find. So basically, I think that I'm in favor of all kinds of ideas, but I think people shouldn't be persecuted or feel intimidated that they can't honestly say what they feel. And also without this special vocabulary, where I teach, if you say the wrong word, like one new wrong word, you're just out. And the vocabulary keeps changing, and that feels to me more like a trap. It's like a gotcha. It's not really an attempt to be more inclusive. Yes.
Morning, ma'am. Thank you for your talk. My name is First Class Byrne from the Coast Guard Academy. Something I've been looking into is, I definitely understand how social media serves as a propagator for these echo chambers and victim mindset of a lot of different groups of people. Something I've been struggling with is how, in my opinion, our actual electoral system and our governing structure serves for this dual party system, whereas one candidate is pitted against the other. If you don't have a candidate that you necessarily align with directly, you choose the best possible option, and that really does serve to propagate that kind of it's not you, it's me, or it's not me, it's you mindset. So do you think this needs to be a grassroots effort wherein if the constituency changes their mindset on this victim sense, our candidates will change, or does this need to come from the top?
Such a great question. I wish I knew I'm still thinking about this. I was just at an event for Andrew Yang, who is starting basically a third political party precisely because of what we all see as a lot of dysfunction, that you're getting a system that seems to reward extremism. I think we should think carefully about it. I guess because I teach in the law school and I value the US Constitution so much, listen, my field is actually developing countries and foreign policy. Countries like of Africa and Latin America, they've had 70, 100 constitutions. They just keep passing new ones. So I am actually very wary about amending our Constitution too quickly. Like, let's get rid of the Electoral College, let's add this, let's put more justice on. I get it. I get so frustrated with the system myself too that I often feel like I want that. But when I look at all these countries that I've studied, I realize how much stability our US Constitution has provided. And the fact that we have had this one with a limited number of amendments is part of our bedrock. So I'm kind of hesitant to do anything that's just like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I do think that everybody senses right now that some form of reform is necessary. I'm still an optimist. I like to think that, look, if we just get a leader who is charismatic and bold, a lot of things turn on one person. If you think of history, both bad and good, somebody like Hitler, somebody like Martin Luther King, it's like some very, very powerful, charismatic figure that can make people inspire them, I think can make a huge amount of difference. So that's where I'm still kind of putting my chips, although I know exactly what you mean. There is so much frustration. People don't even want to vote. They just feel like, my view is not anywhere represented in what I'm seeing here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for being here. My name is Cadet Rommel Meza. I'm from Prince George County, Virginia. My question stems along your concept of unconscious bias. I know in your presentation you talked a little bit about it and how us as humans have tendencies to think about certain things without realizing that we are. So my question is, could you go a little more in depth about that? And do you think that there's a legitimate way or process of getting rid of this unconscious bias we have as human beings?
Yes, so I love this question because the final chapter of my book is actually all the positive stuff. So for most of the book, there are a lot of scary studies about how tribal human beings are. Really pretty scary, you know, how much we need. And by the way, chimpanzees and, you know, monkeys are like this too. It's really very, very innate in us. But what studies also show is that no matter how, take a Trump supporter or, you know, and a never Trumper, if people are able to interact one-on-one as individuals, you know, for a significant, not that long, but like if you take two people and you first don't tell them what their politics are, and they talk about dogs and sports and pizza and hiking, they get along. It is actually not that hard to bridge human divides. Like people like each other, they find all this commonality. And a great example of this is the Vietnam War. There are lots of studies about all the things that went wrong with that war, but one, ironically, very positive outcome was that in that war, you had wealthy white people, but also Mexican Americans, African Americans, Korean Americans. I mean, all these people were kind of thrown together, and the quotes are amazing. They're like, you know, if you are so scared, you're all alone, and you look and next to you is another person, you don't care what accent he has, or you don't care what skin color, right? And that experience led to a lot of people coming out with much more open and inclusive attitudes. So there are all these studies from around the world, I mean, from Belgium, from, you know, places in the Middle East, from California, that show that there are things that you can do to bring people together. The key, again, is interacting at a human individual level. I'm not talking about diversity. Actually, those studies are depressing. It's not that the more diversity you have, the more everyone likes each other. Like if you just throw them all together, it can be a mess. You really need to encourage kind of human one-on-one individual contact with people as human beings. And then it's astonishing how fast and how deeply those connections can last. So there's a really positive side to these psychological and neurological studies too that show that there is a lot that can be done.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm a little short for this, but good morning. I'm Rebecca from Christopher Newport University. I was wondering, do you believe the tribe conflict is more about power, or is it about the competition for more scarce resources?
I actually think those two things are related, but it's a very good question. So when studies show that it's when resources are short, or you know, like there are not enough university spots, there are not enough jobs, there's not enough money to go around. That's when, even in countries of Africa, Middle East, everywhere, that's when you see the most social strain. So definitely, I saw on the slide of that film, President Obama speaking, like we need to make sure that people still feel this is a land of opportunity. And as soon as people start thinking that because of whatever policies that they don't have opportunity, whether it's to get into universities or get jobs, there is going to be tremendous incentive to want to blame it on somebody, and it's often an out-group member. Your power, I mean, I think a lot of it is, you know, at this moment, you saw my quote, because we're at this weird moment where whites are just on the verge of losing their status, majority status at the national level, and there's a, you know, people talk about the browning of America. It does feel like there's kind of a zero-sum competition for who's going to get to define the nation's identity, whether it's who wins the Oscars or wins all the Pulitzer Prizes, and there, I again think that conferences like this are really important. That's why I was trying to stress that we don't have to pick. Like, it's like, oh, should we be multicultural or should we have a really strong American identity? We're lucky as Americans. We don't have to pick. We can be both. We can have Chinatowns and little Havanas and, you know, a Persia town, and people could speak different languages and different churches, and we can still be very patriotic Americans. We don't have an established church. We can take pride in the principles of our Constitution, and that's what I think is a gift. So yeah, I do think there's a little bit of a power struggle right now, and that's kind of the way that I'm trying to think. I think this conference is dedicated to trying to dispel that way of thinking, that we're in this us versus them contest for power within our own country. I think that's, I think we can do a lot better than that.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. My name's Seth Rosario. I'm from Guam, so I like spam too. From family, just talking to them living in Guam, there's been an increase in immigration from like Iraqi refugees or just from other islands, Micronesia, or from Chuuk, or just that set of Micronesian islands. So there's been an increase in crime and a lot of cultural traditional values that have been lost just due to the original population, those from native to Guam just leaving. Do you think that there's going to be a conflict of immigration for the future due to the loss of identity of the island or anything like that?
Oh, you're talking about
on
Guam specifically.
Yeah, on Guam specifically, or like how to resolve that conflict between preserving the traditional values and ideals, but having just an increase in immigration with different cultural identities, and how to kind of balance it out.
So I'm not an expert on Guam, but I can talk more generally about the immigration problem that we have as a country here, and actually that, everybody's facing this. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants. I'm always going to be a very kind of pro-immigration person. We're the land of immigrants. Having said that, I think it goes back to this tribalism, political tribalism. We just can't talk about it. And I think we need to be sensible. We have always, it's important, in order to have this kind of collective national identity, we need something that holds us all together. And I think that's really important. I love multilingualism. My kids speak Chinese too. But I think you need a common language. You need a common history. I think we need civics so people understand. To be an American, you have to subscribe to certain values. So, where I teach now, if you just favor any restrictions at all on immigration, you're called a xenophobe. And I think that's ridiculous. How can we need to talk? They're really difficult questions. How many? Through what process, and we're all going to disagree. We're going to have different feelings about it. But for me, it's all about the dialogue, that right now, I don't even think that people can talk about it. Again, when you say crime, it's very difficult even to understand the facts. You flip between 2 cable news stations, and on one, immigrants are depicted as this kind of monstrous thing, and then you go to the other station and it's another group that's and so it's very, very difficult even to glean what the actual facts are now. So I think that's my best answer, which is that I think that immigration is going to be one of the toughest issues. It's going to have to be a balance. I think it cannot be unlimited. You need time for the national identity for people to learn to be Americans. And that's why we have nations. We're not at the point yet where we just have one world citizenry. So there have to be some form of limits. But, I think the most important thing is we need to be able to talk to each other about it.
Thank you, ma'am.
One last question,
okay.
Please.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Cadet Charles Rapella. Having all these tribal divisions, like having he said that, he did that, at what point does it hit, or can you tell whether it is the individual who is at fault, whether they are like, I'm doing something to you, or you are not, or you are at fault for your outgoing, or compared to having a toxic aspect of a culture or policy?
Wow, interesting question. I'm not sure I'm answering this, but one of the things that I think is really not good on a lot of these liberal college campuses is that it doesn't come down to the individual anymore. It's almost like somebody will be hauled in and called, we just had an incident at Yale Law School, racist. And I often feel, I'm a big believer in individual responsibility, being the tiger mom and all, but I feel like I'm increasingly seeing people that are just targeted and shamed, and it's like out of their control, So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I do feel right now that for a country that is rooted in individual rights, that, by contrast to the nations of Asia, we're so proud of American individualism. I'm surprised at how many people kind of go along with a herd mentality, or they're afraid to express their individual views because they might get canceled, or people just go along and cancel other people because they don't want to get canceled. So I think we need to resist that. And again, I'm not quite sure I'm directly answering your question, but I like this pitting, this giant faceless community. Some of the studies that I cite in my book show that human beings, once they get into a mob or a group, they do things that they would never be capable of doing as an individual. Like you become almost like another creature when you're with this mob. So I think part of the answer is that we also have to, everybody has to be strong. I think a place like this really teaches, both the importance of community, but also individual accountability, individual respect, individual responsibility.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think our time is up, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Actually, go out here.
Oh, okay.
We want to thank you on behalf of the superintendent staff, the VMI Corps cadets, for coming out and speaking to us today. This is a token of our gratitude.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's a great audience. Thank you all.